Um, Greetings, colleagues from across the globe. Um, I hope you are all well and thank you for joining us. I need to note this first that this session is being recorded. And please do introduce yourself on the chat and tell us where you are connecting from, and so that we will know who is in the room, so that you can keep engaged. Today, you are joining a panel, which is a collaboration between University of the Built Environment, ISOCARP, and the CAP. And this collaboration, it does indicate our intention and our desire to actually make sure that we put the issues of women in the front. And it's quite important that today we have panel of experts, highly experienced people who will be sharing with us their expertise. Colleagues, this meeting or this webinar is happening at the times where the needs of women and the pressing issues such as social issues, issues like environment, and of course economic issues are at the pressing point. So they are the ones which get to be prioritized, and the issues of women and their voices and the representation continue to take a backseat. So today we have put together a panel of experts who will actually be confronting these issues forward and head on. We are of the view that issues around the planning and urban planning are actually not neutral. It's not a neutral position. If you are a urban planner, what you put forward is what we will see at the end of the day. If you put forward a view of planning for women and children, that we will see that in the implementation and in the way people relate with the cities. So that's how the profession is. But today, we want to make sure that the lived experience for women from different perspective is being interrogated head on and forward. And we've put three words which are interlinked. The first one, we are talking about rights, which is to do with what are women entitled for. Because this is their rights, which is very important. What are the rights for women in as far as our urban environment is concerned? Then we're also talking about justice. Justice is more about the moral obligation. What is it that is right and fair for women? Then we link that with the action, which is implementation. How do we then take all this, the rights of women and what is fair, which is moral obligation, and to make sure that we are actually able to implement? So today I'm inviting our panelists to make sure that in their deliberation, their reflection, they do so boldly and honestly, and also reflect on issues of success stories, issues of ongoing discourse, and actually say, how do we deal with that? We've already presented a number of questions that we will be tapping into that. Without any further ado, I will then jump into my program, which then requests that we have a representative from University of the Built Environment, who's one of the key organizers for this event, to give welcoming remarks. Thank you. Over to you, Charlotte.
Hello, everybody. I'm Charlotte Morfitt. I'm the program leader for the MSc in Urban Planning. And on behalf of the University of the Built Environment, we just wanted to give you a very warm welcome as we're hosting this on our Zoom. And we're delighted to be hosting this webinar and to have you all virtually joining us today. Thanks.
Thank you so much. As I've indicated at the beginning, we have two presidents here from CWIP and of course from ISOCARP. I have not seen you here. Then I'll ask President of ISOCARP to give us a welcoming remark.
I think Joa is here, Hope.
Oh, yes, I saw her. Okay, I saw her.
Okay. I'll start then. So, good morning, everyone, distinguished colleagues, partners, and friends. It's a great pleasure once again to welcome you in an important session of Women in Planning and Women and Planning, and this time about rights, justice, and action and practice. So, on behalf of ISOCARP, I extend our sincere appreciation to our partners the Commonwealth Association of Planners, and the University of the Built Environment for their collaboration in convening and supporting this timely and necessary dialogue. As planners, we hold a unique responsibility. The decisions we make, the planning we do shapes not only the physical environment and the form of our cities, but the social, environmental, economic realities of those who live within them. So we must acknowledge that planning systems have not always delivered equitable outcomes, particularly for women and underserved areas where, once again, disproportionately affecting women. So across the world, women continue to experience cities differently in how they move, in how they access opportunities, and how safe and included they feel in public spaces. And that's why today's theme is really critically important. A rights-based approach reminds us that equitable access to land, housing, infrastructure, and services is fundamental. A justice lens challenges us to confront the structural inequalities embedded in our urban systems. And let's pay particular attention to spatial justice and climate justice. And a focus on action in practice, it calls on us to move beyond the commitments and to ensure that our plans translate into really meaningful change on the ground. At ISOCARP, we believe that inclusive planning is not optional. It's really essential to achieving our vision and mission, sustainable, resilient, and thriving cities. And we also recognize that women are not just stakeholders in planning processes, but they are leaders, professionals, innovators, whose contributions are vital to shaping better urban futures. So this session provides an opportunity exactly to learn from practice, to share knowledge across the continents. And we have 2 webinars, so we can address other parts of the world as well later on today, and to strengthen our collective commitment to gender-responsive planning. So let us use this platform and let's challenge the assumptions, listen deeply to each other, and advance the solutions for the benefit of everyone, and let's be transformative. So a big thank you to all the speakers and the chairs. Again, we have 2 sessions with different sets of speakers. It's wonderful. And a particular shout out to Charlotte, who is in our Women in Planning leadership team, but also connected to the other organizations and our partners. So from all the different perspectives, thank you for the organization and the curation. So I wish you productive, inspiring discussion. Thank you.
Thank you so much, President Elizabeth. I will ask President Yu to take a stand to give us a welcome remarks.
Thank you, my dear friend Hope. Appreciate, and very nice to see so many familiar names and faces on the screen. As Hope said, I'm Ewa Cilliers. I'm the president of the Commonwealth Association of Planners. I'm based in Sydney, so it's nighttime here, so I won't be joining the next call. But thank you so much for everybody that's facilitating this, and just for all the hard work that went into setting sessions like this up. It's been in the planning for many months, and it's taking a lot of people to bring this to life. Echoing everything that Elizabeth said, this is the easy part. If you're the second person to do the welcome, I can just say everything Elizabeth said is true and so wonderful. But I just want to say, I think this is a very powerful group that's convened here. And amongst all of us and our networks, we can probably change the world if we use our powers in the right way. So it's a big privilege to be part of this group, make the most of it, listen and learn, and then we take it out into our worlds and do the little bit that we can to influence, and collectively that become a huge change. So thank you very much to everybody that's already been thanked, but Hope to you as well, Charlotte. Thank you, Elizabeth, Sipra, all of you that's doing wonderful work across the globe. So I'll leave it over to you, Hope, to get to the real work that's meant to happen in the next hour. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and for all those warm welcomes from our presidents and, of course, our partners from University of the Built Environment. I think, I mean, these 3 institutions coming together, like I've indicated, is a powerful statement towards the right direction. And of course, shout out again to Charlotte, who are sitting on our neck all the time, get that done, and now we are here. Thank you so much. Colleagues, we have powerful, I keep saying this and I'm very intentional about it. So it's not by mistake that I keep on saying we have powerful ladies today, because these are the ladies who've been working on, no pressure, but who've been working on number of issues. And they are women, you know. I always say that cities which are planned by women are much better. So I will then request that they quickly introduce themselves, just giving us the names and where they are, and then we get into our question. I will start with Shipra, and this is how you're appearing on my screen. So it's in no any particular order, but it's the order at which you're appearing on my screen. And I'll ask Shipra to introduce yourself. From there is going to be Shana, and of course from there is going to be, oh, I can't say all my name, all of the speakers here except after Elena with the, oh yes, oh, Khalid, yeah, she's here as well. Thank you. Thank you. Welcome. Sorry, I didn't see you earlier. So, Shepra, can you quickly introduce yourself, please?
Absolutely. Thanks very much, Hope. Great to see everyone. My name is Shipra Suri, and I'm the Senior Policy Advisor to the Executive Director of UN Habitat. UN Habitat is, of course, the UN entity responsible for cities, sustainable urbanization, adequate shelter, housing, etc. And we are headquartered in Nairobi. I'm joining you from Nairobi today.
Thank you so much. Shipra, can we go to Shana, please?
Hi, I'm Shana de Broek and I work at the Department of Environment and Spatial Planning in Flanders. So I am a policy officer with a focus on underground urbanism. This is about the usage and planning of the subsurface in cities, and we try to think beyond traditional usage of the subsurface. But only the last couple of years, we have actually noticed that there are rising claims and pressures on the subsurface. So we are just now starting to develop policy proposals on underground spaces. So underground urban planning in Flanders doesn't exist yet. So we're at the starting phase of developing policy proposals. So this makes this an emerging field where we can integrate gender responsiveness from the start into the DNA of the discipline of underground planning in Flanders.
Thank you so much. Elena, over to you.
Thanks so much, Hope. So my name is Elena Cornaro. It's a pleasure to be here. I work as a policy advisor for gender equality and social inclusion at the International Institute for Sustainable Development. I'm based in London, but our work is international at the IISD. And in my work, I analyze government policies and collaborate with governments and civil society to support equitable approaches to sustainable development. And that focuses on key economic sectors, which include infrastructure, energy, transport, but also agriculture and mineral governance. So my focus is very much around gender equality and social inclusion. I see I'm in a great company here with lots of urban planners. I think I'll be bringing the gender equality and social inclusion perspective and how some key concepts around gender can apply to planning. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Elena. Can we go to Khalid, please? Was that, yeah?
Hi, everyone. My name is Mazrina Abdul Khalid. I am actually the Secretary General of EUROF International. EUROF stands for Eastern Regional for Planning and Human Settlement. And I am also the President of Malaysian Institute of Planners. I am a town planner by profession, and I actually own my own consultancy. And basically what we do here, I basically do a lot of strategic planning, master planning, and other engagement with many stakeholders. And basically in doing strategic planning, we do develop policies and also integrating policies of inclusion, not just for women, but for others who are actually have special abilities or special disabilities or special needs and whatnot, integration it into the society and making sure that everybody is included and integrated within the policy of the cities. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Mazrina. You know, when you're doing webinar online, there's this feeling. I'm in my hotel room here at The Hague, and you tend to think you're on your own. Can I just have sign of life? I see we have about 61 participants. Just show thumbs to show that you are online before as we start. Just show a sign of life there to show that you are there with us. I'm beginning to feel lonely, yet I've got about 61 people around me. So please just do show a sign of life that you are here. Thumbs, smile, and just show us you're there. The first question I would like to pose to our panelists is that in your context, your space in which you operate in, what does gender responsive planning look like in practice? And where do you see the biggest, and this is very important, the biggest gap between the global frameworks that we have? This will be a new urban agenda, and of course, some commitment on the SDGs, and what actually happened on the ground. So we are trying to match what are the practice and what is happening. We have the framework which guides how we're supposed to do things. Is that really happening? So can I have your reaction first, Shipra? Then I will go to the next person. So the idea is that I will pose this question across the colleagues, then we react. Over to you, Shipra.
Thanks very much, Hope. And indeed, the reference to the agendas is very important. UN Habitat draws its mandate from the New Urban Agenda, which was adopted in 2016, and before that, the Habitat Agenda of 1996 and the Vancouver Declaration of 1976, and a myriad of UN resolutions and decisions in this 40-year window. And at the UN here, we are very aware that while countries have committed to inclusive, resilient, safe, sustainable cities through the NUA and the SDGs, the reality, especially when we apply a gender lens, can be very, very different. We see it, for example, in urban settings where women, many women, most women in a lot of cities lack the access to or influence over basic infrastructure, services, resources, decision-making mechanisms that impact their daily lives and prevent them from accessing equal opportunities or accessing the right to the city, as we say. We're also seeing that urban poverty is becoming increasingly feminized, and I'd love to hear from Elena, for example, and others who work on social inclusion, poverty, and gender. More and more women and girls are living in poverty, and urban poverty particularly, and they are cut off from municipal services, and they're cut off from, again, access to opportunities. We're also seeing, and I can give a couple of quick examples, when women and girls have access to effectively participate in decision-making, to become meaningful participants in local development, the spending on services, the distribution of services changes. It changes color, it changes character, and this results in more inclusive cities for all. So on the question of where is the biggest gap, Hope, I think for me, the biggest gap is on the understanding that we don't just need to have gender policies, but that every policy has to be a gender policy. And that is really the big shift that we need to see in policy making. UN Habitat, very quickly, as part of our work and my work, has been driving a gender responsive, gender inclusive agenda on housing, on land, on basic services, on urban planning. A very big part of our work is advocacy for women's land rights. We do that through, for example, the Global Land Tool Network, which ensures that women have equal and secure access to land, addressing legal, social, cultural barriers that exclude them from land ownership and decision-making about land, for example. Then we also have access to basic services, which we advocate for through the Global Water Operators Partnership Alliance, GWOPA, where we're talking about gender-responsive water management, supporting women's involvement in water governance and the delivery of services. So these are the kinds of things that when I say that the gap is really around having gender policies versus gender-focused all policies, that's the shift and that's the leap we need to make. Thank you.
Thank you so much. You are raising very important point, especially when you say the issue around the gender. There've been a lot of discussion around do we need gender policy, or everything should be gender sensitive? So should it be standalone policy, or should it be embedded and in mainstream in other policies, so that in our planning system we are not just focusing on gender? Because therefore, who become the implementer if it's a freestanding, and how do you then integrate that into the whole system of planning? So it's a very interesting discussion you're bringing this, Shipra. Can I ask maybe Shana, if you can come on that question? Where are the gaps? Or maybe I go to Alana. Alana, is that okay? Let me go to Alana. I just remembered.
Sure.
Yes.
No worries.
Yeah.
So just to start with, in my context, what gender responsive planning looks like in practice, and then I'll address the gaps. So I think when we look at global frameworks like the SDGs, in particular the SDG 5 around gender equality and SDG 11 on sustainable cities, as well as the new urban agenda, there are very clear commitments. And I think in the context of planning, this includes ensuring equitable access to infrastructure and services, improving the safety and sustainability of transport systems, increasing women's participation in decision making, and addressing issues like gender-based violence, which are kind of pervasive throughout. And I think they're also underpinned by a strong guiding principle to leave no one behind, which is one of the underlying principles of the SDGs in general. And I think when this principle is incorporated, it contributes to achieving both procedural and distributive justice for all. And I'm going to touch on these topics throughout my answers, just because justice is quite a central theme to this year's International Women's Day, and indeed also to this webinar. And there's some concepts around the just energy transition and gender justice. So procedural justice looks at who makes the decisions, who's left out of the decisions. And it's a relevant human rights issue, but it's also relevant in terms of outcomes. So research by the International Transport Forum and the OECD shows that women in leadership roles tend to prioritize social and sustainable impacts of their decisions more so than men, though that's not always the case. And a lot of men are also driving very equitable and sustainable work. And distributive justice, on the other hand, is about fairly allocating costs and benefits of planning decisions across different groups. So that looks more at who benefits from infrastructure and investments in particular areas, for example, as Shipra alluded to, who has access to land, who has access to essential services, and what barriers exist. And that asks questions like, are transport systems designed around commuting patterns that reflect men's commuting patterns more than women's? Or do some groups face higher exposures to poorly lit public spaces? And again, following on Shipra's point, are different genders' experiences of poverty different? And what does that mean for access to transport and public services? So with that in mind, the gap that I think I'd like to touch on is on this commitment to the leave no one behind principle. As articulated in the SDGs and the New Urban Agenda. So in my work, I see that often when gender responsive policies are designed, they have a very narrow conception of gender that doesn't actually take into consideration different marginalizations that are based on gender and other factors like age, race, and ethnicity, disability and caring responsibilities, or poverty, among many others, which really shape the way that we interact with the lived and built environment. And I think that can lead to planning decisions that assume that women are a homogenous group and risk leaving behind the most marginalized. So I'm going to touch on the leave no one behind principle a lot in my answers today. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Elena, on that one. Very interesting submission there, leaving no one behind. We have always heard about that a lot, to say leave no one behind. I think there's a lot of literature and a lot of discussion. The question is, why are we still getting it wrong? Don't we understand what the meaning of that? Do we know what does that mean, leaving no one behind? Or we're just talking about it because that means we are not being intentional. We're going to have to be intentional. So I will then, with those words, thank you so much for the submission. I will ask Shana to come on board.
Hi. So I would like to provide a more urban planning perspective. When you look at underground planning, we see that it's very much an engineer is dominated by engineering. So that's a structural fact that it's very much a male-dominated field. Females are very few represented. And this is actually a systemic issue, I think, because cities were mainly built by men historically, based on their assumptions, their knowledge, their expertise. And now we're talking about how cities are supposed to be neutral, but they're not. So the infrastructure of cities actually represents this historical power infrastructure, which benefits dominant groups, and women are fairly much left behind in it. And when we look at it from a systemic point of view, we see that this is part of our institutional cultures. This is based on certain patterns, structures, mental models, who very much resist change. So we have this kind of, with a difficult term, institutional inertia, because not only do these cultural biases change very slowly, planning systems change very slowly. These are slow to change. They rely on established routines. So this means that as a planner, we must constantly actively question these hidden biases in our planning systems and in the way that we try to build cities. So I think that how we can cope with this institutional representation is to build institutional capacity and awareness amongst planners and policy officials. So we need to train planners, engineers, decision makers on these gender issues, try to develop guidelines and toolkits, because most urban planning professionals aren't trained to see gender impacts in urban planning. So that's one topic that I would like to address here.
Oh, that's very interesting point you have indicated, especially around being specific to the discipline to say, you're basically saying that cities which are planned better must include women, and which link with what Elana said, and of course what Shipra is saying. So I'm starting to see connecting of dot and telling a similar story across. I'll ask Mazrina to react on that first question, before we jump into our third question.
Okay, thank you, Hope. My perspective on the gender responsive planning is basically a planning that recognizes everyone, not just women, but women, men, girls, boys, different age, different needs and whatnot. So basically, in Malaysia, I would say perspective of from Malaysia, I don't think we have that an issue of women not being recognized in terms of decision making or in terms of inclusivity in planning and whatsoever. And what we looked at here now is like the issue of demographic profiling that has changed in the city. I think not just in Malaysia, but also in many global cities, that the fertility rate has gone down. The change of numbers of household within cities has gone down. That shows that demographic profiling, especially cities in Malaysia, are going into an aging population and things like that. So basically, when we design the city now here, we are also looking at the big change into a demographic profiling, and we look at what are the needs and what are the gaps that we need now in terms of incorporating, making sure that all these needs are included. So basically, we look at housing, access to housing, whether it's for people who are lower income, mid income, or high income, whether they require affordable homes and things like that. And then it also leads into facilities, not just basic facilities in terms of infrastructure, but also basic facilities like schools, access to clinics, hospitals, and things like that. Because of the more older people are now living in the city, the policies are also changing now. Our new urbanization policy in Malaysia has also looked into addressing the needs of making sure that the special needs people and also the aged people, facilities for them are being looked at in serious manner in terms of facilities and whatnot, and also access to employment, not just to women but also to the people who are going into an aging group, who are retired in employment but they still wants to continue working. So those sort of group of people in terms of employment are also being making sure that they are included within the employment sector. And our issue here, it's not about the policy gap, it's more of how translating the policy into implementation, because most of the policies in terms of including women, including other special needs and whatnot, are at the higher level. Like at the SDG has set out a very nicely, a policy at the higher level, at international level. Then at the national level, we are putting all this nice policy within our national physical plan, national urbanization policy. However, when it goes into state and it goes into the local level, translating those policy into implementation are the big gap that we are addressing at the moment, including budgets that needs to be allocated. When we look at, inclusivity of people, we look at safety aspect, we look at in terms of education aspect. So this at the implementation level, the budget requirement to making sure that all these are implemented and making sure that, the new needs for the people in these cities is being catered to. These are the gaps that we are actually polishing at our level now. So in Malaysia, I think in terms of policy, we have so much policy, strategic direction and documents, but the gap are basically at implementation wise. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much, Nasrid. When you are saying that, I was getting very excited, and then I realized that I'm supposed to be chairing, not presenting, so that I will hold my view. But I mean, the issue around implementation has always been an issue, and I'm glad that it's coming out at the international stage, because many nations actually this is what they struggle with. It's not a lack of policy; it's a lack of implementation. And the question is, why are we not able to implement what we've planned and said we're going to do? Is this the issue around the capabilities? Do we have the capacities as nations across the globe? But also a very key point you've mentioned there is the issue of budget. If you cannot budget for it, then don't plan for it. And I think that's another issue, is that we're budgeting for things, we are planning for things we don't budget for. So it's not going to happen without a budget. Thank you for bringing those important insights. Colleagues, we have audience here, and please do feel free to pose some of the questions on the chat. Maybe colleagues will be engaging with you, even the speakers, if they're able to, but maybe amongst ourselves we'll be engaging. So feel free to talk to us. I just don't want the chat to be empty, because then it gives me an impression that I'm left alone in my hotel room. So I want to hear you guys talking on the chat. I'm following on the chat. So I will move to our next question to the panelist. And this time around, I will start, I will fly to London from here. Elena, you're going to be the first one to answer this one. Can you share a specific example from your work where you have worked to promote gender equity in planning, and what made it effective? You can share with us more, like what are the lessons, what make it effective, and what were the hardest obstacles you had to overcome. So we want to hear some lessons there, and how you overcome it. You may not have overcome it, you're still in the process, it's still okay.
Thanks so much, Hope. Yeah, indeed, I'm going to be sharing some insights from an ongoing project for my ISD on transport electrification in Indonesia and the Philippines. I saw earlier in the chat someone is joining from the Philippines, so very excited to hear your insight on this. So the broader goal of the project is to reduce greenhouse gas emissions through transportation in cities in both countries. And is led by our team in Jakarta and Manila. And as a strategic priority, the project integrates gender equality and social inclusion throughout, and just transition practices to support energy policies that advance emissions reduction, but also strengthen social protection at the same time. So I touched on them a bit earlier, but we applied the concepts of procedural justice and distributive justice to this project. And in terms of procedural justice, there are some big differences between the two countries, particularly in terms of political participation and decision-making in the transport and energy sectors. So the Philippines is a leader in the region on gender equality, and Indonesia faces some higher gender equality gaps. But I'm actually going to touch more on the distributive justice obstacles. So your question was around what were the main obstacles that we encountered. And there were three main points. I'll just touch on them very briefly. The first first is the accessibility to public transport for people with disabilities was one of the major obstacles. And second was safety for women, particularly in transport. And the third, which is the one we're working on most, is the lack of data on vehicle usage and mobility patterns for these groups, which can help to inform policy responses to the first two issues. So in terms of accessibility for persons with disabilities, that's a big concern, particularly in Indonesia. There are very few wheelchair accessible vehicles and routes. In Jakarta, research shows that discrimination also, direct discrimination of people with disabilities being denied transport by ojeks, which are motorcycle taxis, without any justification. And actually, only 14% of people with disabilities in Jakarta use public transport at all, which is quite a low number. This is a lot better in the Philippines generally, but data is missing in that space. And safety for women in transport, on that topic, in Jakarta, research shows that 1 in 5 incidents of sexual harassment happen on public transportation. That's 20%. That's relevant as a women's rights issue just in and of itself. But from a planning perspective, it also impacts how women and men use transport systems, particularly public transport, and how that influences their mobility, their safety, their ability to get around. And in the Philippines and Indonesia, both countries, there is actually some very important and ongoing work on improving safety on transport, such as women's and children's desks at Davao's bus terminals and buzzers for sexual harassment and safety incidents, as well as training of transport workers on these issues. So that formed part of our needs analysis, but because important work is ongoing on those topics, we didn't dive into it that much further. The key gap that we identified that is under-addressed in both contexts is the lack of disaggregated data on vehicle use and mobility patterns. And that's critical because without that data, it's very difficult to make any kind of planning decision or policy that distributes the benefits and the costs of any kind of electrification equitably. So to address this, ISD is currently developing a memorandum of understanding with Quezon in the Philippines to collect disaggregated data on ridership and usage of three-wheelers and buses. So three-wheelers, we already know, are a key last-mile transport mode, particularly for women from commuting from transport hubs to their homes and back and forth. And buses are important public transport mode. So we're just aggregating this data by ridership, route, and trip purpose. And the data will also include vulnerability profiling for persons with disabilities and senior citizens, students, pregnant women, and solo parents. So that looks at vehicle accessibility features like ramps, secured wheelchair slots, audiovisual helps, but also stations and terminals, which touch more on accessibility issues, but also safety concerns. And just to what are we doing with all this data? In the end, we'll integrate it into IISD's cost-benefit analysis method, which is known as the Sustainable Asset Valuation Methodology, or SAVI for short. And that's a methodological tool that uses system dynamics and project finance modeling to help assess the social and environmental costs and benefits of infrastructure projects, and accounts for risks that are not usually incorporated in traditional cost-benefit analyses. So predominantly focuses on environmental and social factors that are not usually quantified. Just to give a very quick example, so when, for example, if you're considering in this case where to place EV charging stations and lighting, if you have gender disaggregated data on vehicle ownership and travel patterns, and you know that gender-based violence is a concern, then you can make planning decisions on where to place charging stations, lighting, and parking spaces, for instance, that improve safety for women. So I'm not able to say what the biggest success factor of the project is because it is still ongoing. So the verdict is out for that. But I'm happy to post a link just on the SAVI methodology in the chat, because I know that there are a lot of urban planners in the call who might be interested in that. And also the team that run this methodology also have a free course every November that they run. So I'll also post that in the chat.
Thank you so much, Ellen. I think you can post that on the chat so colleagues can engage with that. Like I said, I would like to keep our audience engaged. So I want to ask something where they will just give us an answer with one word or two words. It was very clear, I mentioned from the colleagues here, and I know we got different colleagues from all over the world. In terms of the policies and the implementation, what do you think is an issue in your country? What are the main obstacles which is hindering implementation for gender mainstreaming? Is it the capabilities, capacity? Is it governance? Is it budget? Just give us a word there. We'll see how you guys respond. What do you think? I don't want a story, just one word. How do you sum up your challenges? Then with those words, I will then move to Shipra. And thank you so much, Elena, for detailed explanation of your case. And like I see you've already shared the link. Can I then ask Shipra if you want to respond to that question?
Yeah, thanks, Hope. And Ellen, I find a lot of things that we're saying sort of resonating, between our respective experiences, and I think it's the same with the other colleagues. A couple of points that Mazrina raised as well. So, in terms of a specific example or a couple of specific examples, where we work and I've worked to promote gender equity in planning. I'll give you one example from Delhi. In India, many years ago, I led the development of a safer city strategy for Delhi. And, it started as a question of violence against women, usually in public spaces. Elena, you mentioned on public transport, etc. And once I started unpacking this, I realized that there's multiple dimensions of intervention that you need here. You need from infrastructure to services to public spaces to housing, which is a classic urban planning portfolio of interventions. But you cannot go very far unless you really examine the legal system, the police reform, the justice system, the obstacles that women face in actually getting justice, mindsets, media, community-based, sort of responses and how effective those are when in the absence of systemic risk. So it became a much bigger strategy than just an urban planning and urban infrastructure oriented strategy. And that was very interesting. The challenge was exactly that it became so comprehensive that the implementation of something around multiple sectoral policies became almost impossible. The question that we raised right up front, do we need a gender policy or do we need gender mainstreaming across all policies? I think we need both. But I think the harder part is to mainstream across different policies, even starting from convincing people in government, heads of departments, heads of ministerial departments or local government departments to say this is important. Why? Go to the Women and Child Development Department, they will tell you. Why do you come to me when I'm talking about transport, for example? This is not my problem. Women and Child Department has a budget. Go talk to them, So the second piece is also around budget allocations. I think, Mazrina, you raised this point, and as did Elena. I think putting our money where our mouth is really important. And policies can be very nice, very beautiful, but how much of a budget are we willing to allocate? The distributive justice part of this, is absolutely fundamental. And we ran up, against that quite a lot. Then we had, of course, the larger mindset issue. And in India, the challenge is that, the issues again on women's rights and justice and violence against women have in some ways regressed over the last decade. So we're not making progress, we're actually regressing. And that's a challenge. So those were the challenges. I do want to flag one other example. I'm not going to take it very deep, but on this question of regress, for example, Afghanistan. UN Habitat has been working in Afghanistan for 30 years, more than 30 years. And we've been working at the national government level, at the local government level, and with community organizers. And And now, particularly the work, in the policy setting is impossible because of the current, government, the administration, the political environment. Gender is not just not an issue, gender is very clearly an issue that is not a priority, right? Gender equity is clearly a policy, an anti-policy at this point. So how do you continue to work with women at the grassroots level, community mobilizers, local community leaders, so somehow to keep them involved in decision making and in influencing local projects, and where the not the EV charging station in Afghanistan, but where the hand pump goes, for example, to pump water, or where the community infrastructure, where the health center goes, for example, and who has access to it. So those are the kinds of challenges that we come up on an everyday basis in our work.
You just scared me there. You just scared me there. When you talk about regression, I'm like, no, we can't be regressing. We cannot.
No, we are in so many countries, Hope, we are. And that's why this conversation today and in this year at this time is so, so very important.
I think Charlotte, she's our champion in organizing this. We need a follow-up on this one because we really need to talk about that discussion. We can't be planning going backward. I think there's a problem there. And the UN has spoken. So please, let's come back to this point and discuss further, maybe on another webinar. I think it's a request from myself. I'm sure the panelists will agree. I will then ask Mazrina if it's okay to come to you and try to reflect on that question as well.
Okay. In terms of examples from the work that I've been doing or still been doing here in Malaysia, when we're talking about planning planning a city with gender responsive in mind, it's not planning just for making sure only a house is enough, this kind of density, this kind of typology, not just that. But I think more importantly, we are talking about the concept of livability, how we would be able to access to housing, how we be able to access, though the house is there, if we are unable to access to it, it's no point, isn't it? So access to housing, access to public facilities, access to work, access to employment, and all this, what it meant is that we're planning it to make sure that the neighborhood is walkable. The neighborhood is integrated. The planning of the area is integrated with public facilities, with community facilities and whatnot. The development are saved. The element of safety are being incorporated. The mobility network are being looked at throughout. So it is not in isolation. It's everything. And in also making sure that people are inclusive in terms of the development. So the mix of housing typology needs to be developed within one area, not just one particular, not just one particular housing product, but making sure that, the housing product that being offered there are a variety. It can cater for younger generation, it can cater for the rich, it can cater for the poor, it can cater for the middle ones, so it is inclusive in that manner. So I like the idea of mainstreaming the gender responsive planning, making sure that the planning are thinking of, all these needs are included as a fundamentals of planning. I think that's the most important thing. It should not be just, making sure that just one aspect of gender, but mainstreaming it throughout the planning itself. And we just using, gender as women as an issue, but it's actually making sure that the planning are inclusive planning for everyone, not just really for one type of people. So I think the most important, I think has been mentioned by everyone here, is data. Same like here, if you have that data and the data are shared, you will be able to make a better decision in terms of planning, more accurate decision in terms of planning. However, many they're not. Even in Malaysia, the issue is that data, we have a lot of data, but the data are not shared. Are still in, with data sharing is still a challenge for us, but we are now developing Malaysian Urban Observatory at the national level, and at the state level we are also promoting the State Urban Observatory, and the local level at the local authority are the Local Urban Observatory. The spirit is that, all data should be shared, and this data should not be dead. It should be shared for decision making and analysis. If you just collect the data and you keep it and not sharing it and not analyzing it, then it's also a dead data. It's not useful for anyone. So the data should be shared, and the data should be collected for analysis, and then decision making should be better. I think the most important thing are the data. And if I can share now, I'm also involved in the local developing the structure plan and local plan for Putrajaya for the next 25 years. So we are now looking at the integrating mixed development housing typology, making sure that the development integrating more activities of land users rather than single land users, making sure that access to the affordable homes and also access to facilities being given throughout, and also the mobility part of it, especially on the active mobility being extended throughout the cities. Yeah, so yeah, I think that's my thoughts at the moment. Thank you so much, Hope.
Thank you so much. Issues of data is coming across, I think almost all of you have reflected on that, and it's quite important. We have a lot of data across nations which are sitting in different departments, but they're not talking. So we need to consolidate the data so that we're able to tell a comprehensive story. The lack of data very often is based on how the data is arranged in a particular institution and how it's being shared across. So I think that's a very compelling point that your colleagues are making there across. Can I ask Shanna to come back on this point and react on this question?
Yes, sure. As I mentioned, I focus on underground urbanism, and this is about using the subsurface as a physical space where people can roam and exist, and so the subsurface can be seen as a vital dynamic part of our cities. Now, recently, our research has been focused on design recommendations for these underground spaces, because mostly these subsurface spaces are perceived as dark, isolated, perhaps even unsafe, actually unagreeable places where you prefer to get out of as soon as possible, especially as women. And however, if we want to include these subsurface spaces into our cities in a qualitative manner, these will have to evolve into places that we want to reside. Now, when you consider gender inclusive design in relation to the design of underground spaces, we do see some interesting topics which we have to bring more to the forefront to be able to make it more gender inclusive. Because urban underground space design is dominated by engineering standards, is dominated by safety codes, cost-benefit analysis, technical feasibility constraints. These are hardcore topics, and they rarely include gender commitments because, to be fair, they are perceived as softs and nice to have. They don't weigh as much as technical feasibility constraints and so on. So one of our design recommendations on urban underground spaces, this focuses on the livability. So on the importance of creating spaciousness, playing with atmospheres and drawing in nature and providing light. Now, all these things, they can be traced back to the importance on the feeling and perception of safety. Even more than the actual crime rates, you have to feel safe even in subsurface places. And underground spaces nowadays, they amplify this vulnerability because they reduce visibility and social presence. So the design has to focus on lighting specifications, to eliminate shadows, to make sure that there are no hidden or isolated places, to provide long sightlines where people can see each other. Visibility is very important. Also, the layout of where the exits are, and provide very much wide corridors in underground networks. And this relates actually to a second design recommendation on connectivity. Now, we know connectivity as to the subsurface and the surface, but also between subsurface places as to an underground network. Now, when we perceive this underground connectivity from a gender responsive point of view, we notice that our network, and more specific, the layout of our network, has to be attuned to the different mobility patterns. Now, again, this is the data aspect, but we see that gender analysis of mobility patterns in general, has shown that women's mobility is more often characterized by trip chaining, by care-related travel, by off-peak travel, by multimodal journeys, and then the stroller or load-bearing mobility. Now, when you plan subsurface networks from the start, this means that you have to plan for everyday mobility, not just the commuting or the peak hours. And this has to do with the layout of the underground network. It has to be transparent, clear, and intuitive. That means direct connections between these undergrounds, transit, healthcare, childcare, commercial functions. And this plays into the urban planning concept of the 15-minute city. This 15-minute city has to support care work, has to integrate childcare, schools, healthcare into these neighborhoods. And like Mazrina said, improve walkability and step-free access. Now, the last one regarding design combinations is on continuity. So we need to make sure that there is this kind of mixed use of private and public functions. Because if you don't do it, if you just focus on private functions, this means that there will be a lot of dead ends in the layout or isolated functions. So the layout needs to provide actually consistent activity, passive surveillance of people. Now, this can be done by designing in a multifunctional manner, not monofunctional, to include services that again support this care work, but also provide family-friendly spaces and facilities, public spaces, even in the subsurface. So we actually want to make sure that this gender-responsive design, we all know by now that it's not just about adding lighting or CC television. It's a way of thinking and planning and designing the surface and the subsurface, of course. So we need to make sure that when you design a new construct, gender responsiveness isn't a random afterthought. It's something that has to be at the forefront of the design-making process as a structural dimension of the spaces that we use.
Thank you so much for those submission. In one of the questions here from our participant, they raise issues around actually the care work that women do and how that can be supported from the design perspective. And you were starting to talk to that from how we're supposed to design and talk about spacious. And I was like, maybe you have read the question or it's just the way the questions were arranged. Thank you so much for those points. You raise issues around livability, which speaks directly with the needs of women and accommodating them. And while I still have you on the stand, Shana, I want you to answer number 4 for us. Then I can go for the last question for other colleagues before we can entertain our colleagues online. So this question goes as follows. So this is number 4. Women are obviously treated as beneficiary most of the time for planning decisions, right? They're beneficiaries, so you benefit from what someone have planned for you, rather than obviously the agents or in terms of how we engage them, right? So we see them as beneficiaries. And how do you think we should change this to make sure that there's a meaningful participation for women, not just as the end user of the services which are being designed from somewhere else by other people without women?
Well, like I said, in Flanders, urban underground space planning, it's a new field, which means that we can make it more gender responsive from the start, and we have to make sure that women are included from the start. And gender responsive planning means changing how decisions are made, who participates, what data is used, how priorities is set. It's about embedding equity into the entire planning cycle, from policy design to planning definition to budget. Now, the thing that I thought was most difficult is how to institutionalize this women participation as very much co-creation and not just consultation. It's not just about inviting women to the table. Women need to be seen as experts, not just stakeholders. We have to rely on this lived experience as expertise. Our lived experience is expertise and is equal to technical knowledge. And only this will make a difference how to transition from these beneficiaries to co-creators. Now, one major hurdle I see in this is the fact that participation, co-creation, that requires being confident enough to engage, which means that we need to build capacity and confidence. We need to say that our lived experience is expertise. We need to enable women to participate as equal partners. So that means also when we host these participation or co-creation events, we need to offer simple explanations of technical proposals, not just technical jargon, heavy processes. Work with visual tools. It comes down to empowerment when you want women to be co-creators and not just consultants.
Yeah. Thank you so much. You see, when you talk about our lived experience as expertise, it then means that we are highly qualified, actually. If you even have a degree in urban planning or a PhD or whatever qualification you have, or you are specializing in, then it makes you even more qualified. So we are double qualified. So there's no reason why we couldn't be included in decision making. Thank you so much for those submission. I think we are moving along very well. So I'm going to ask our other panelists to attend to the last question. Then after that, I will open the floor and take some questions. I'm worried about time. Shall I just bear with me a little bit so that we can make sure that we go through all this? I think the discussions are getting heated and the colleagues are bringing very important points. I'm monitoring the chats as well. You guys are bringing very valid points and I can see what's happening across the globe. Keep them coming. So the other one, the last one, here I'll start with Mazrina, if you can be the first one to answer this one. Looking ahead, right? What is the one change, whether it's in policy, whether it's practice or culture, whichever one you choose, that will make the biggest difference in women's rights, safety, and participation in the cities and communities you work in? What do you think is the major spin-over? Like if you change this, we will actually, or if you improve on this, or if you introduce this, it's a magic wonder. What is your magic wonder based on some of these things? It may be something that we didn't mention here. Maybe this is limiting for you, but based on your experience, what's your take?
Policy. I just now I wanted to mention something. I think when Elena presented just now the data, I think it's quite amazing because the data has actually segregated further into women per se. Like we do not have to that until to that level. Our data is because we see the data as a gender bias. We don't really go in detail in terms of people who walks from one end to another. We do a study in terms of first mile last mile, but we didn't go into women per se who actually walking. We don't go up until to that detail, and I think maybe that is important because and if we want to create a city for a city that is gender responsive or inclusive, we need to make sure that we actually take into consideration this group of people. Like Shanna was saying that, if we want to create a safe city for women, then women, though whether she is professional or non-professional, but they are expert in what they want. They know what they know what is safety to them in terms of mobility, what is they need, what's their needs and whatnot. And if we are wanting to make sure that the city is inclusive in terms of children, then we engage with the children. So engagement in terms of policy, making sure that they are not just being engaged once you have the decision, but they are being engaged from the beginning to make sure they are part of the co-creation of the solution. Yeah, policy, I think. Thank
Yes.
you.
Yeah, Elana, can we have your reaction briefly on that?
Thank you. And thanks so much, Masrina and Shana, also for your interventions on the importance of different data points for women's experience and really going into depth on those. I think that also touches nicely on it's not a magic wand. I don't think we have to look at it comprehensively. As Shipra was saying, there's so many multitude of factors that need to be looked at. But I think for me, the biggest policy change, I work on policy, so it would be to focus more on distributive justice. I've touched on it quite a lot. And I think that I saw a question from Christina Rutke in the chat that concerns the issue of qualitative data as well, and that we need much more of this rather than of quantitative data in sensitive areas like gender planning and mobility patterns. And I think it's really both that we need. So planners, I think they need quantitative data in order to quantify costs and benefits for their projects and make a pitch also for their projects. But then qualitative questions go much more deeply into open questions of experience, of mobility patterns, of different people that you might not be able to capture so accurately in data, in quantitative data. So thanks so much, Christina, for raising that. So I think just to finish off, finishing words for me on distributive justice, I think it means moving beyond treating gender as this tick box exercise without engaging in detail on what the purpose of that is. What is the purpose of gender responsive planning, and asking some deeper questions that might also touch on that qualitative data element. So are we recognizing the daily lives of every group, and particularly those that are already marginalized when making planning decisions? Are we unintentionally reinforcing existing inequalities or excluding certain groups? And then finally, how can we ensure that the benefits and the burdens of planning policies are shared fairly with a genuine commitment to leaving no one behind? So I think that's how I'd like to finish off in terms of what I think would be helpful. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Shipra, can we have your reaction briefly on that? Briefly?
Very briefly. Okay. You said one change. I mean, there's a couple of things that I wanted to touch on. Just very quickly first, that, it sounds like a cliche, but the understanding that women's rights are human rights and human rights are women's rights is just not there enough. And I think that's something that we need to keep pushing harder on, that this is not a separate box to tick. That's the first. But I think my main point here in terms of the one change or the one thing going forward is coming back to the point on data, and taking one step back, in fact, measurements, indicators. We measure what we care about. That's the first. And change only follows when there is measurement. So there is a theory of change here. If we don't measure something, we don't care about it, and it will never change. And therefore, the cycle it'll be a vicious cycle that will continue. Yes, we have to disaggregate all development data. Elena, you talked about quantitative, and others said as well, access to land, housing, basic services. And our surveys just showed that, that disaggregation is just not built in many countries. But we also have to disaggregate qualitative measures. What is the effectiveness of our participatory processes? What is the effectiveness of our laws and policies from a gender lens? And then not just from a gender lens. This was a great point that's been made by Masrina, by Shana, by all of us, an intersectional lens. It's really the lived experiences. Shana, you mentioned it's really so important. But the lived experiences of women living in slums and working in the informal sector will be very different from women who are displaced and who are female-headed households on the run, migrants, refugees, and very different from urban middle-class working women also using the same public transport and the same public spaces. So I think that bit on not just starting from the point of disaggregation, but starting from the point of what we are measuring and why we are measuring, and then talking about how we are measuring it, that is to me the fundamental shift that we need. I'll leave it there.
I heard you twice when you said that, what are we measuring? and how we are measuring. That's a very important point there. Shannon, can I close with you on this point? I know I've put 4 questions on you, so just be brief on this one.
I'll be very brief. I would like to again relate to the systemic issue. So the fact that the underrepresentation of women and the fact that cities are planning is mostly, and cities were built by men. So that means that it's part of our institutional cultures, and planning systems are slow to change, systems are slow to change. So we must keep actively questioning these biases. And I think also one question that we haven't touched upon yet is when you start to plan new spaces like the subsurface, we still need to define why gender matters, because not everyone already is knows the importance of it. So the systemic issue plus defining again why gender matters when you start off on new planning processes, I think is very important.
It's such a pity, Shanna, that we still have to define why gender matters years later, when gender has been in existence for the longest time, but we still have to justify that. But I agree with you. I mean, there are many projects which are coming up which are not gender sensitive. Then it means that we do need to prepare ourselves. Colleagues, we have zillions of questions and comments on the chat. I want our panelists to just pick any and respond to that. While you're surfing through and checking on them, I want just one participant who will be very brief, because if you're not, we will ask you to cut. And just put your question through the voice. We want to hear that we are talking to real people, not people typing. So just one person who can just raise a hand and you come through and just give your question, your comment. And please be very brief. Just tell us where you are connecting from and what is your question. We just want to hear your voice. I told you I've got a fear of being alone. So I want to be sure that I've been talking to the people, real people online. One person, and be very brief. Yes, for me. Yeah. Yes, over to you. Am I right? Am I seeing for me?
Hello.
Can you assist? Am I right? Is that?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, thank you very much. My name is Fumilayo Modebola Fadimine, calling from Nigeria. I've been paying rapt attention to all what the wonderful ladies here on board are saying. Now, this brings to the fact that data about women is very important in whatever anyone is doing, particularly in planning. There is no doubt that women are being marginalized. If you see on my comment, I told you about traffickers. I'm talking about drivers, commercial drivers, not even wanting to put women in front, to be on the front seat. It is as bad as that. But when you have accurate data that we can use scientifically to prove that women are indeed very, very important factor in planning and inclusivity, that will go a long way. So I say that the discussion is in that line. And I want to thank you all for the wonderful presentations. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for me. I mean, we wouldn't know that there's also politics in the way you sit, even in a public transport. I thought that was a natural process that you sit where you want to sit. But thank you so much for bringing this into discussion. Can I ask that our Charlotte, please, I will need your assistance quickly. Just pick 2 questions we can answer live, and then the rest we can maybe provide a written feedback through the writing of a statement and just make some reflection when we do some more of a report which we can share with colleagues at a later stage.
Yeah, I think there's one on the Q&A, which is about data again, which is obviously coming up as one of the main points from this discussion, although I take Shipra's point around working out what we're measuring. It says, my question concerns the issue of missing data regarding mobility patterns. Do we need much more qualitative data rather than quantitative data, especially in an area like gender planning? And there are more. I'll find them in the chat for you, Hope.
Okay, so can I just request that we answer that question? Any of the panelists, you can take that. Then just reflecting on that. I don't remember.
Hope, maybe I think I touched on it briefly in my closing remarks, actually, on this question. But I really agree on the importance of qualitative data. And I was just typing, I'm going to share a piece of research that I came across in the Philippines for the project that we're doing on transport electrification that examines women's commuting experiences in urban Philippines from a qualitative data lens and uses a photovisual data collection method, which I think was really interesting. So I'll share that in the chat just as you're looking for other questions. But I think we did cover it, but maybe one of the other participants might also want to.
Oh, okay. I think I agree with that. There was also a question around the care work that Shanna already started to care services that you touched on it, and infrastructure are crucial. In your experience, what are the most effective ways to incorporate them in planning practice? I think, Shanna, you did try to touch on that. Then there's some comments as well.
There's one question that was from Dory Reeves at the very beginning of the session, but unfortunately had to leave. It says, to what extent is relative urban wealth as well as poverty gendered?
Yes.
I mean,
Anyone?
I'm happy to touch upon that lightly. I think there is a lot of research going on around the feminization of urban poverty. More and more women do not have the assets to tide them over the crises that we face. More and more women are pushed into poverty at the very first possible push, from the environment. For example, COVID, women who were just over the poverty line, more and more women were seen as being pushed into poverty. So the poverty pit is definitely coming out quite strongly. But also there is the gender wealth gap that is coming out in many, many countries. It's not just the disparity between earnings, which is the gender pay gap, but things like property, savings, investments, are much more in the name of men than in the name of women. And this is all about, again, right to own housing, for example, right to have your name on the papers related to land and housing and financial independence, etc. So definitely there is a lot of research around the types of assets that are held by men and women. And this is where wealth and poverty are two sides of the same coin. We see a gender wealth gap and we see a gender poverty gap very strongly in cities and towns particularly. Over.
Thank you so much, colleagues. I would like to request Charlotte to come and do reflection, but I just picked something very important worth noting here, that we have a whole class of architect students in attendance from University of sorry if I pronounce this wrong, Nizwa, attending this session. And maybe you can one student, just give us a quick reflection or even a comment, just one, be very short before we can call upon Charlotte to do our reflection, please. I just, I'm a professor at the university, so I work with students. So when I hear that they're students, I get excited. Can we just have one student there, if they're able, just to greet us and tell us what you've learned? You don't have to tell us about projects, because obviously maybe you may not have worked on some of the projects.
Oh, as a fellow lecturer, it's not scary. We're all friends here. So if you've got any reflections or anything you want to ask or say, please do put on your microphone or put your hand up, and then I can give you access to speak. Maybe a step too far for them, Hope.
Yeah, I see. Yeah, I know. It comes natural being a lecturer. You want to engage students, but it's okay. But thank you so much for being with us. Over to you, Charlotte. Give us our closing remarks and obviously reflection.
Yeah, no, well, thank you so much to our panelists. That's been a really rich and diverse discussion. This morning, I saw UN Women did a post on LinkedIn saying in 2026, no country or nation is close to gender equity. So this conversation felt even more potent and important as I saw that. I think what I picked up from this, and these are just thoughts from all the different speakers and what they've said. So I really liked the reflection or the comment on gender as a way of thinking. And something that came out for me from what everyone was saying is that we need systems thinking in this discussion to deal with these systemic issues. I like the point that Shipra made at the beginning that every policy needs to be a gender policy. So we really need this properly integrated into what planning does. There is obviously a need for data and a need for intersectional data, but I think we need to take what Shipra said on board as well. Like, what are we measuring? Why are we measuring it? How are we measuring it? And it's not always just quantitative, but qualitative is equally as important. And I think this idea of procedural and distributive justice, I have to say, as a planner in the UK, that's not necessarily a framing that's ever come forward. And that was really, I think that's a really important way of us thinking about our role in justice and our role in sort of affecting gender-informed planning, as we're calling it in the UK at the moment. We've heard that there was a need to focus on budget and on implementation. And that planners and the built environment professionals need training in this. And I thought that was really important. So that speaking to what Shanna said around that, we need to remind them why gender is important and how it's important and what their role is. And this is something that's happening in the UK. I'm working through another group called Women in Planning UK on an MOU across the built environment, across all the different gender networks. And one of the aims is to get other built environment professionals, excuse me, to understand their role in gendered environments. Because I actually think planners, at least female planners, understand this, but perhaps some of our colleagues in engineering, architecture, surveying don't necessarily understand the impact that they have, and that's just as important. But that was all the reflections for me. I think it was the measuring and the data collection, and this is something that I've said in the UK needs to happen, that we need to require through our national policies that we collect sex disaggregated data in all of our evidence bases to really understand. But unfortunately, we're having a conversation where it's very pepper potted. So there's a couple of good cities doing very good things on gender, such as Edinburgh, Glasgow, Leeds, and London. But at a national level, we're still talking about planning policy being neutral. So thank you, everybody.
Thank you so much, colleagues, for attending and for, I know you could have chosen to be somewhere else, but you choose to spend your hour and a half with us. So we really appreciate and sincerely grateful for our great speakers. I told you that we have great speakers, and I've been saying this throughout the week, and I'm very excited that they have delivered their A performance. And thank you so much, colleagues, for taking time and coming to talk to us. And we sincerely appreciate. We all agree that inclusion is not an invitation, it is a right. So we need to make sure that we include women into our planning system, and just not just as participants or as beneficiaries, but they need to be decision makers, and we need to assess our inclusive approach and our participatory approach that we say we are including women. Thank you so much, colleagues, and I sincerely I'm very grateful for having me and allowing me to drive this ship. I'm signing off. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Hope. Thank you,
Thank you.
everyone.
Have a great rest.
Bye-bye.